happened there?
Well,
and also, what did you mean exactly? Because it's not like we've been marathoning Bergman movies. Our last few episodes haven't been, like, horribly artsy.
We did... Okay, let me fucking look. We did Christ movies. We just got through Czechoslovak communist cinema. I think before that, we fucking did... God, what did we do before that again? We did black cinema, which is already kind of a non-populist thing. No, do the right thing is kind of... I think I just feel like I've just gone through a lot of these movies and be like, oh no, am I going to get another fucking like cinema verite, watch the film as we go, which is exactly what these films were.
Well, kind of. They didn't.
There's gonna be a lot of like French New Wave comparisons we're gonna make. Some of them positive, some of them not.
I didn't feel like these were super verite.
I don't think the new wave part of the Czech New Wave is at least as applies to these is actually kind of accurate. But we'll get to that. I just feel like I'm dreading the movies more as we just go deeper and deeper into like our like art house like foreign cinema lens, which I'm glad to do which I'm glad that's kind of the point of this thing.
Well, we can steer away from Europe for a little while. I know.
Yeah, I guess I just feel like I'm done. I can't. I need something. I need something that allows me to just like shut off my brain for some of it.
Okay, well, we'll do something fun next week. I've kind of been on like I got on that like mini screwball comedy kick for a little while back there, and I think doing more of those would be fun.
The Howard Hawks episode was a lot of fun.
Okay,
even if it didn't like bring up Baby. But that was also like that's one of those movies where it's very interesting to understand kind of why it doesn't work.
Yeah. No, we had a good conversation about that. I was very happy with.
I was pleased how that came out.
Yeah, no, I was too. All right, let's get started. Welcome back to the Hack Fraud Show, everybody. We are back and talking about the films of director Miloš Forman, who passed away a couple weeks ago now. We're taking a look at some of his earlier work back when he was still working in Czechoslovakia in the 60s. Two of his probably most well-known films of that period, which are...
part of the famed, or at least famed in our circles, Czech New Wave.
Yeah, well, famed, I don't know, but it's certainly... Anytime there was, like, any kind of a shift in, like, a national cinema's direction, they call it the New Wave, just after the French and everything. But anyway, we're looking at Loves of a Blonde and The Fireman's Ball, both of which I enjoyed. I wasn't blown away by either of them, but...
I have a lot of things to talk about with both of them, I'll put it that way. Right. I enjoy The Fireman's Ball quite a bit more, but we'll get to that.
Okay, yes. I kind of thought you would like The Fireman's Ball, but we will get to that shortly. John, what have you seen lately?
Jesus Christ, we're going right into this. Okay.
I know one of the things that we're about to get into, so this is going to be
due to the fact that I've just had like a shitload of homework and other things, I think... Is the only film I've seen Ready Player One? That's true, that's depressing.
Oh dear. What a fun time for you.
Oh dear, okay. Well, I have quite a lot to talk about with Ready Player One. So... This movie, based on the actually pretty infamous Ernest Cline novel at this rate.
Yeah.
Like, the amount of backlash against this novel at this point, I think I get to call it infamous.
Well, one of my favorite things, I find Twitter more and more to just be an aggravating distraction these days, but Lindsay Ellis was reading the book in the lead up to the movie coming out, and her kind of real-time reactions to things in the book were quite delightful to experience.
Yeah, people have called it transphobic. There's a lot of isms attached to it. But regardless, we decided to grab one of the greatest filmmakers of all time in Steven Spielberg and attach him to that. And I'm going to say this what I already said in the run-up, which is that I am just so fascinated to see a making of this movie because I just really want to know Spielberg's role in this. Like, was he pretty much a de facto producer that every once in a while made the camera do pirouettes? Or was he, like, actively, like, was this maybe not a passion project, but was this something he was actively working on every step? Mm-hmm. The credits don't really suggest that, especially considering Ernest Cline is one of the writers of it.
Right. Well, I've kind of, based on what I've read, and I've read quite a bit about Spielberg just by virtue of that book I read, The Men Who Would Be King. He is pretty involved, like, right from the beginning. He what he likes to do is, like, bring in a screenwriter he trusts to kind of rewrite the first draft and work it into something that he can shoot.
Yeah, well, I'm curious with the other stuff he did. Was, like, the guy who wrote Jurassic Park involved with that movie?
Michael Crichton, I think he did a draft.
Okay.
I think he has screenplay credit on it.
Whatever. Of course, he didn't have Ronald Dahl involved with the BFG. I'm just kind of thinking about like what other precedents there is, because this is hardly the first time Spielberg has taken on a novel.
Yeah. No.
This is a great black mark on Spielberg's career. Actually, probably one of the biggest great marks of a director of his caliber. Because I can't really think about, like, what other, like, giant black marks are on, like, filmmakers of his caliber.
Indiana Jones and the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull. That's all I got.
Okay. Oh, shit, I forgot.
Everyone forgets, because everyone likes to pretend that movie just didn't happen. Side note.
Everyone kind of buys the narrative that George Lucas is the result of that.
Yeah.
But he wasn't. Jesus. But, yeah, this movie is both absurdly busy and absurdly paced and plotted, yet also just extraordinarily dull.
Mm-hmm.
Just, like, really boring. Like, the plot of this movie is, if you've been living under a rock in, like, our, like, respective film circles, it's about some loser who's playing a video game called The Oasis, which is some giant kind of, like, social media communication VR chat video game thing that has pretty much taken over the planet. In very real terms in the movie. Mm. Well, at least, actually, that's another thing. I'll get into the world building in a bit, but this guy, the guy who made the Oasis wanted to have, like, a game so he can find, like, a successor. It's kind of like a Willy Wonka thing if Willy Wonka was already dead.
Right.
But, like, you have to find 3 keys, and if you find 3 keys, you get an Easter egg, because people play video games to find Easter eggs. I'm sure you're familiar with that terminology.
Sure.
So this loser who goes by the alias Parzival in the game, because, of course, it's like, it's an online space, you can't use your real name. Mm. And he meets up with other people, like a giant, like, Orkman, or at least that's like the avatar is an Orkman, who is called H and Artemis, and they get a little crew, and they have to find the keys, but there's also an evil corporation that's trying to get the keys for themselves because they want to own the Oasis, and they're doing a bunch of illegal things, but no one seems to give a shit. Like I am just, like, so confused as to what this world is. Like, we are shown, like, Columbus, Ohio. Yay, hometown, woohoo. We're told Columbus, Ohio is the fastest growing city in the world in this movie. I have no idea how that works. And it is very difficult to get a read on this kind of world because we are butted up. We have little farmers markets butted up against these giant, like, corporate headquarters. Mm. And, like, I just have, like, no clue. Like, has, like, the government fallen? We see American flag, so I guess not. Like, what is this world like? Why is the world in this kind of strange, like, happy post-apocalypse? And where we know things are bad because the white people are poor now. I'm going to talk about some of the things that, like, they could have gotten into, but just don't, because, like, there's a lot of, like, isms being thrown at this book for, like, the nature that it is. Mm. And a lot of those things are sanded down. But the issue still remains. Like, there's a point in this movie where we reveal, and I don't give a shit about spoilers because I don't like this movie, where H, the big Orkman, who from the very beginning has a modulated voice, and we learn that H is a black, assumedly queer woman. And that's kind of and it kind of brings up that idea of, like, people of color or different genders assuming the identity of like what would be quote unquote the norm, which is an assumedly white male, to sort of hide themselves from harassment or utter reasoning, and that just goes completely unanalyzed. And I think, and I talk about this because this movie could have so easily done that, especially because there was a lot of conversations about what it means to accept an avatar and what it means to like truly like devote yourself to an online persona that you create and you get to manufacture. And like also I think it's connected to things like tits or GTFO, whereas like the default on the internet is to be a white male. Like everyone assumes you are a white male unless proven otherwise. And I think that would have been like a really excellent thing to go upon, but no, we gotta have lots of references to things like the Iron Giant. Oh my God. And also there's a point in this movie. I'm going to talk about the visuals real quick because I want to get to this point where they do The Shining. The visuals of this movie are absolutely fucking bonkers. It is just like CGI nonsense on top of CGI nonsense, battling other CGI nonsense, whilst like the camera does like some like demented version of like the Spielberg oneer. And it is just like utterly insane, and I almost want to do like an experiment where I put like 17 different people in front of this movie in a slower paced movie like the movies we had to watch, and just see how their brains analyze it and just how their brains do it, because I think like I have ADHD and I felt like this movie was giving me ADHD. Because, like, it is just so packed and just so full. And, like, sometimes, like, the Spielbergian, like, even though it's busy, we always have a single point of view. Sometimes that isn't true here. Like, sometimes the directing is kind of shoddy, and there's also just a bunch of lens flares and just, like, visual just noise constantly in every frame. And just, like, pop culture references after pop culture references exploding into every frame, and it is just like nonsense to look at for the eyes. It looks terrible most of the time. Like the best looking scenes are when it's just like two people in a room, two real people in a real room just talking to each other.
Yeah.
Those are when by far the movie looks the best. Which leads us to like, because everything's CGI, because it's a video game.
Right.
That's not so bad, but there's a point in this movie where they enter The Shining because a key is in The Shining. And what it becomes is like Spielberg taking this like, and it must be known that Spielberg greatly admires Kubrick, found him like to be a great companion. Finished, he made AI, and that's like the love letter to Kubrick. Yeah. So there's a lot of like referential things going here. He turns like the iconography of The Shining into like weird CGI action scenes, but there's also like it's either like it's shot on film, or that they did a really good job, like, putting digital grit on it. So it is just, like, so weird to look at as, like, a visual creation. And it's also just something as, like, the film in a nutshell, where it's, like, presenting us, like, 80s pop culture things, but not understanding a single thing about them or what they mean. Like, what it means to have someone in, like, a Halo costume run around on the field, or, like, what it means to have the Iron Giant shooting things. Just, like, flat out just shooting things. And it also, I'm struggling so much with this movie because I think, because I'm disappointed at it in certain ways, because I do feel like there was like a really great movie to be made from the bones of this story, of like something about Avatar, something about pop culture, something about how we interact with pop culture, how corporations command pop culture. Yeah. But like the figure that you could surround that with, like played by, oh god, what's his fucking name again? He was in fucking Bridge of Spies. He's the new.
Oh, Mark Rylance.
Mark Rylance. How could I forget that? Mark Rylance plays like this insane, like Jobsian creator of the Oasis. And, like, the people in the movie literally worship him. Like, them trying to find Easter eggs they tried to psychoanalyze him and analyze his relationships and the pop culture he likes and like, his intentions on making this thing. And there was very little analysis as to what that means. And very little analysis as to what this guy is and kind of what his worship of, like, 80s pop culture is. Also, fuck the 80s. Fuck the 80s. Like, they ruined everything. The 80s ruined everything about America, and we've refused to say this because we like things created in the 80s.
I think it must be noted that Spielberg has a lot of affection for characters like that who are kind of,
Yes.
adult male children who are kind of trying to bring their childhood fantasies into the real world. Like his
Yeah.
treatment of John Hammond in Jurassic Park, the movie, is
Mhm.
very, very different and sanded down from the way Michael Crichton treats John Hammond in the book.
Yes, but like there was also something to be said. Like there were even in like those movies, there was a clarity around them.
Sure.
In this, there was very little clarity, or if there was clarity, it was left on the cutting room floor.
Mm-hmm.
Like it feels like we should be subverting this like figure of him as a god, but we just don't. And it is just so strange to watch a master like Spielberg fall into that. Is there anything else for me to say? I guess like one of the things I want to recommend to you is Kyle Kaelgren, the guy who does like Browse How High, that video series, did like this lengthy like rambling review of it with his girlfriend, who was a black woman. And like it's kind of rambly, and they get hung on things they probably shouldn't, but it's a fascinating sort of like dive into like these sort of the Spielbergian themes that underlie it, and also just like my previous rant on tits or GTFO that are a part of it. But other than that, it's also just really boring. Super dull. Like the villains just have nothing to them. We never really know why what the villains are doing is bad. The like main character is boring as paced, and like the characters who are seemingly interesting, like H, like the woman masquerading as a giant Orkman, which could be a very interesting thing to hang your movie on.
Yeah.
And a very like pointed direction in the case of like what avatars mean. She plays a very small role in comparison by the end of the movie.
Uh-huh.
And there's also like a love story that makes not much sense. It's not atrocious. Like apparently like the love story in the book is like super problematic.
Yeah, that's what I've heard.
I didn't really find it as problematic in the movie, though. Maybe I'm not the guy to analyze that. So I don't think it's worth the pitchforks and that have been like thrusted into the book.
Uh-huh.
But it's also a black mark, and it should be treated as a black mark. And I'm fascinated as to why it became a black mark, other than like Ernest Cline being a shit baby. Well, I hope this has been in some way coherent.
No, it has. It's interesting. Just because like there's been surprisingly little like substantive critical discourse about this movie that I've seen.
And like there's also like a great video online called like if Ready Player One but for girls.
Oh, okay.
Which I'd recommend. Which is pretty much like all of like the referential like pop culture things we see in this movie are all aimed at males.
Yeah.
Like where the fuck is like My Little Pony in all of this?
Yeah.
Or shit like that. Like it's all rigorously gendered, and like there's little analysis of that.
Yeah.
But that's beside the point.
Yeah. Well, I have no idea when I'm going to see this movie. I know I should, but God, every time I like see the posters with those fucking digital avatars on them, they look awful. I just get upset, and every time I find out that it's 2 hours and 20 minutes, I just go, ugh, do I have to do this?
You feel every second. You feel every goddamn second of that runtime.
Wonderful.
But like, it also must be known that these avatars really do look like somebody trying to CG animate an anime character, and that's just horrifying to look at as like your main character.
Yeah.
I don't know whether I want you to see this or not, because in some ways I really want to talk to you about this, and I feel like your like opinion would be very valid in forming my own opinion. But you're also my friend, and I don't want to torture you.
I'm probably gonna end up seeing it. It's just a question of when. I've been busy, and I had other movies that were more of a priority, which I'm going to talk about here in a minute.
Yeah. Just about any other movie than this would be a better priority to have. But it's pretty much like whether like you want to torture yourself for the sake of intellectual enrichment, and that's what I decided to do when I decided to tag along with Matthew and Alex.
Well,
and I think I got something.
Yeah.
Tyler, I've spent way too much time talking about the worst Steven Spielberg movie I've ever seen. What have you been watching?
This from the man who actually quite enjoyed the BFG, which.
Oh yeah, I like the BFG because first of all, Ronald Dahl isn't a shit child, and that movie actually has something called focus and charm and I don't fucking know good filmmaking.
All right, well I shouldn't have opened this can anyway. Let's see. I saw a few things this week. I finally got around to watching, because we watched it for my Westerns class, Clint Eastwood's Unforgiven.
Ooh.
It was okay. I mean, yeah, I don't know. I was kind of underwhelmed. Parts of it are interesting and well done. I do think that this is an interesting character, the character that Clint Eastwood plays in the movie.
Yeah.
Though I think that the character played by Gene Hackman is way more interesting and not nearly in the movie enough. I think he needed way more time, and for a movie that is kind of its reputation is kind of a deconstructive take on the Western mythology and the Clint Eastwood Western and all that stuff, which it is to a certain extent. But I was also kind of surprised by how kind of straightforward and kind of old-fashioned it is. It's a pretty violent movie with a very old-fashioned kind of sense of morality.
Yeah, well, that's also kind of Clint Eastwood's thing.
That is.
It's heroes being destroyed by quote unquote evil system, and it also must be Clint Eastwood's one of those directors where his politics has always been very clear. Yeah,
I mean his politics don't get in the way of this movie nearly as much as they get in the way of, say, American Sniper, which I've said it before, I'll say it again, is one of the worst movies I've ever seen. But
oh yeah, it's atrocious.
I don't know, I was a little bit. I wish they'd gone further. If you look back at Westerns made even in the classical period, the best ones are always kind of questioning the mythology and delving into the psyche of their characters. And
the man who shot Liberty Valance was doing this in the classical a John Ford movie.
Yeah, no, I mean John Ford is the best of it. You get that, you get stuff like My Darling Clementine, which is morally murky in a lot of interesting ways. This movie, I think,
exists.
Yeah, I think this movie's reputation as far as a kind of a revisionist Western is somewhat overblown, but it does have some interesting stuff in it, and I think it's worth watching. Okay. I was just kind of, I was like, okay, I've worked my way up to this, and it really doesn't feel that different, other than they're allowed to show blood.
Maybe that is the subversion. Is that they're allowed to show blood insofar as I think there is value in being able to show violence. I understand. I don't think Clint Eastwood is going to be the guy to guide you to a truly subversive revisionist Western.
Mm-hmm.
I think the violence itself might be enough to call it a revisionist Western. Though I would be also interested to be. But this is something we might want to look at further. Is how the screen interacts with violence.
Yeah,
and how we as audiences have interacted with that.
Yeah, but I mean, sure, yeah, okay, it's a more violent depiction of the West and a demythologization and all that stuff. But I don't know, even before 20 years before this, Sergio Leone was making these insanely violent, tone poems that were way more critical of their characters and of the moralities of the West and all that stuff. So
Van Peckinpah would make really violent films.
Yeah, exactly. So I don't know that it brings a ton of new stuff to the table, but it again, there is good stuff in it. I don't want to denigrate this movie completely, because I do think that Clint Eastwood is kind of working towards something that he doesn't quite achieve, but the journey there is...
Clint Eastwood is a figure we often kind of struggle with.
And I haven't really seen many of his directorial efforts. I think it's just been this and American Sniper, but he is a filmmaker who I kind of go back and forth on. Well, not even go back and forth on. He's one that I'm kind of just constantly perplexed by. what he does, what he chooses to make, and like the kind of reaction it gets.
I'm curious to see Gran Torino. That's the one of his I'm curious of.
You know, I read the screen. I had an interesting experience with that movie actually. Because in my freshman year screenwriting class, my professor gave us that screenplay as an example of like just kind of a basic like bare bones kind of like written screenplay, like just it was a like kind of a document just to kind of teach us how to write in script format and like how to write, you know, script wise. And with that, it was pretty useful. I read the whole script. He also like gave us access to the movie to like see how it translated. I read the whole script. The movie was like so just kind of functional that I didn't finish it. So I saw like half of Gran Torino and never finished it.
Interesting.
Honestly, it's not a bad script. It does play with some interesting things, but I don't know. The movie was kind of, But
well, it is what it is.
Yeah.
I don't think we're going to be able to escape this figure anytime soon. Especially he keeps fucking making movies.
Yeah. I'm gonna have to see $1 Million Baby at some point. We'll see what I think of that. Let's see. I went and saw A Quiet Place, the new horror movie that's been kind of making waves. I liked it a lot. It's a very good, solid genre piece. Like, it's not playing with any kind of like super revolutionary ideas. I mean, this is not another Get Out, but
no.
The setup is very clever and innovative, just with these monsters who can only react to sound, so you have to be quiet. They do a great thing in the setup where one of the kids is deaf, and she's kind of like the emotional anchor of the movie in a lot of ways, which is really cool. And they deal with her and her experience and her disability and some other things in an interesting way. And the direction of it is really slick. It looks really good. I think it was shot on film. And there's a lot of clever staging and just a lot of interesting shot selection and stuff like that. And the performances are all pretty good. And it does some interesting things. And it's a very just well done horror movie, a very well put together genre piece. And I enjoyed it a lot. The ending is a little goofy, but it doesn't come anywhere near to ruining it. I think it gets to a catharsis that works pretty well, and then there's a little bit of extra goofiness tacked on. But
yeah, it sort of seemed like a pretty slick genre piece to me, and maybe I'll get out to that at some point.
No, it's worth seeing. I had a lot of fun with it. It's a very entertaining movie. And then I saw. So it's interesting because I saw these two movies 2 days in a row, and they're very oddly similar in some cosmetic ways. The other movie is Lynn Ramsey's new movie, You Were Never Really Here. They both are very kind of dialogue minimal, very focused on like sound design. Both have really good sound designs. There the similarities pretty much end, but You Were Never Really Here I thought was tremendous. It stars Joaquin Phoenix as this kind of veteran who has PTSD, and he now works as kind of a private like vigilante for hire who rescues kidnapped girls. And it's about 89 minutes long. It's pretty relentless. It is brutal at times. This is another Lynn Ramsey movie. I've now seen 3/4 of her feature film oeuvre.
Okay.
I still haven't seen Ratcatcher, but I really want to. I think I've said before, she excels at just giving you the barest minimum amount of information you need to piece together what's going on. Like, the whole, whatever's going on with Joaquin Phoenix, like his trauma, like it's done, like there are some kind of flashes of his past. They're never like pieced together. It's all very elliptical, but you can kind of piece it together yourself. And his performance is just really extraordinary. He has bulked up, like transformed himself, like physically. Like if you were to watch this and The Master back to back, like it'd be an unbelievable like document of his range as an actor. and I don't know. I was really blown away by it. My friend who I saw it with described it as like what it must have been like to see Taxi Driver in 1976, and
Okay.
it does have some similarities, but they are very different movies also, and I think that Lynn Ramsey has just been one of like the great discoveries of the last like few months for me. Just kind of going from like hearing people like Barry Jenkins talk about her and not really knowing who she was or what she'd done. Actually, Every Frame of Painting did a video on her work a little while ago, so check that out, and it might get you intrigued. Like I said, I watched We Need to Talk About Kevin, which was also spectacular, and Morvern Caller, which I didn't love, but I did notice that because I kind of watched it in like two separate chunks. Like I was watching it at home, and like all my roommates were getting home, so I was getting like periodically interrupted.
Yeah.
Like I had really liked the beginning, and then as it went along, it was kind of losing me a little bit. But then the next day, I like picked up and watched the end, and I did really like the ending. I kind of liked where it went. So I may need to rewatch that movie in like a year or two and kind of reappraise it. But she is really an extraordinary filmmaker, just in so many ways. So run out to see this movie.
Her praises to the end of the word, and you were never really here. Seems absolutely fascinating.
Yeah, no, it's incredible. It is like it's a pulpy kind of setup, but she plays within that sphere and does a lot of interesting things with it, and again is really devoted to making the character study element of it come to the fore, and that works really well.
I remember being kind of perplexed by the trailer because I wasn't quite sure of the make of it, but it seems like it does like explore everything that you need to explore about this.
Yeah, I never even saw the trailer, but I can't recommend it more. It's definitely my favorite movie of the year so far. So there's that, and that is what I have been watching.
Well, I will be.
So we're talking Miloš Forman. We're talking Czech movies. Now, I know you've seen Amadeus. Have you seen the movie version of Cuckoo's Nest?
Yes, I have seen that one.
Okay.
I thoroughly enjoy it.
Yeah. I watched it right after I finished the book, and the book is just like so outstanding in so many ways that I was a little underwhelmed by the movie, but I may need to watch it again.
I think I thoroughly enjoyed the movie though. Like I think it kind of pales in comparison to the book because like there's a lot of like harsh things that happen in the book that are not so much sanded down, but kind of like put on the down low more when the movie came out.
Yeah.
I think it also must be known that like as it pertains to these movies, I think it must be known to know a little bit about the about Czechoslovakia at this point, because I assume you know very little about the Czechoslovakia.
Yeah, I looked into it a little bit. I mean, I know that the Firemen's Ball was made right before the Soviet invasion, which kind of led to him leaving the country and taking up residence in America. I don't know a ton about it. I just know that it was one of those kind of Eastern Bloc countries that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, like first of all, like the Czechoslovakia is a multinational state with like Slovakia being half of it. It was created after the dissolution of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, and it was one of those nations just carved up during World War II. Whereas like it was the scene of the Sudetenland crisis, and it was invaded first by the Germans, then by the Soviets, and then became a Soviet puppet of sorts during the Warsaw Pact. In the 60s, the communist regime tried to liberalize and tried to reform, which is how these movies exist at all. But then, like the Soviets, the Soviets invaded in 1968. As I think they also invaded in. I believe Hungary tried a similar thing in 1956, and with similar results. And this was and I think like the image of a tank running into a building in Prague is one of those like big like Eastern Bloc happenings. Is one of those like famous Cold War iconographies. Yeah. I think if I'm not mistaken, I think the Czechoslovakia was one of the first nations to get out of the Warsaw Pact and fully drop communism in their Velvet Revolution, where the playwright Václav Havel came to power. But that's a bit of Czechoslovak history, and I think it must be also known that like I think the parts of communism that are being analyzed here or is that of communist doublespeak?
Uh-huh.
Of just how, like, you say the government will say one thing and it is just like a farce. It is so obviously not true, but it doesn't really matter.
Yeah.
Because that's the only information out there.
Mm-hmm.
It also must be known that I think this is important when it comes to Loves of a Blonde, is that, like, there was like a crippling this ratio in Eastern Europe of women to men.
Oh, okay.
So, like, there was, like, far fewer men thanks to the war.
Mm-hmm.
So, pretty much, like, with women, it was a case, like, if you can find a man at all, it's almost a miracle, and it didn't matter how abusive or awful they were, you needed to stay with them because you weren't going to find anyone else, thanks to, like, the demographics there. Mm-hmm. And that's something that is analyzed over and over again in Russian film. I'm not too sure to what extent it was like that in the rest of the Eastern Bloc, though the Loves of a Blonde makes that seem like it's a far more crippling thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I think that is the essential, like, socio-political background to these movies. Yeah. I hope that's helped.
Yeah, no, definitely. It's a good background to have. What do we want to talk about first?
What do you think we have more to talk about?
Probably the Fireman's Ball, I would think.
Okay. Alrighty. Fireman's Fall. I pretty enjoyed this movie.
Yeah, I liked it too. It's kind of a odd thing about both these movies is that they are very clearly comedies in a lot of ways.
Yes. Mm-hmm. But they also kind of, like, veer away from comedy in really interesting ways and become somewhat tragic. Yeah. No, they blend. He blends the tones very well, which is, I think, something you can see, like, even in his American movies. He continued to do that very well. I think, like, Cuckoo's Nest is a film that is, like, full of, like, the sort of tonal yo-yoing that, like, could become very disastrous, but yet is able to feel quite poignant.
Yeah. So basically, the setup for this movie is very simple. The fire brigade in some small Czech town somewhere is having a festival to, I don't know if it's to, like, celebrate their kind of retiring commander or whatever is.
Or whether, we're not quite sure if this is kind of like an annual thing or something of that sort.
Yeah, I don't know. Regardless, it's happening. You have this committee that is in charge of selecting women to participate in a beauty pageant.
And it pretty much just turns into, like, a bunch of, like grizzled, like, old men looking at, like, what is essentially, like, 16 to 20-year-olds.
Those bits of the movie made me very uncomfortable in a way that felt very intentional, but, like, it was
exactly. Still. There's also a lot of that in Loves of a Blonde.
Yeah. Also, you have just this thing where they're having a raffle and the prizes are mysteriously disappearing one by one.
Like, and everyone denies what's happened to them, and it turns into communist doublespeak, where it's very difficult for people to ascertain exactly what's happened, even though it's something as simple as somebody's head cheese was stolen.
Right. Yeah, so I think if you come at this movie with any kind of knowledge of the historical background, I think it's pretty clear that this is intended as a satire of communist government.
Yeah, a satire of communist government. It also must be known that, like, I think, like, the sort of, like, 60s era washed out colors are actually quite fitting, because, like, all of these, like, regimes were strangely conservative and puritanical, whereas, like, everyone's wearing uniforms and, like, traditional dress, and, like, the most scandalous thing is that we at one point see a woman's pantaloons. So that's, like, the most scandalous thing we see in the movie.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think that this movie kind of has a lot in common with The Death of Stalin, which we talked about last time, as far as just turning communist government into this bizarre farcical dance where no one can agree on anything, and it takes a million arguments to decide on one little thing.
Because of, like, there was never, like, a qualified leader of this committee. It's like, so, like, no one's ever sure, like, who's in command or who has orders. Like, the quote-unquote, like, president of whom is retiring seems to really have no idea what the fuck is happening around him.
Yeah.
Which is really funny.
Right. One of my favorite images in the movie is when they're starting the beauty pageant and he starts walking up to the stage and the other guy runs out and grabs him and is like, no, not yet. I love that.
Which is also great, and I adore the ending of the movie.
Yes. That is quite spectacular. It all comes to a head in a beautiful way where the committee members just sequester themselves for a minute to, what is it they're deciding on? I think it's like how to get all the or how to get all the raffle prizes back.
And there's also a crisis where like all the beauty pageant members have like ran away and locked themselves into a bathroom.
Yeah. So, and then while they are sequestered in there, everyone leaves except for their commander, and they come out to present him with this ceremonial gift that they've been building up to this entire time, and he opens the case, and of course it's gone.
And it must be like when the power goes off, everyone steals everything.
Yeah.
There's also like one of the most fascinating scenes I've seen in like a movie of like there's a fire during the middle of the ball.
Yes.
And they have to try and put it out, and all they can do is save the furniture. And like they're constant, and like it's just like this like decrepit old man who owns the home, and he's just sitting there like oblivious to everything. People are saying, "Give him a chair. What's he doing? What's wrong with Grandpa?" As like the house is just up in flames. It's a complete loss, and they're trying to put it out by throwing snow onto it.
Yeah. No, that whole sequence was also fantastic, and I love that. Also leads into another one of my favorite tableaus, which is the very last shot of the movie where he just walks back to his completely burned house, the ashes of the ash remnants of his house, and just lies down in the bed that is like lying in his yard.
Yes. With his wife as well.
Yeah.
He mainly just says, this is normal. Yeah. I think it also must be said like that's kind of a subtle comment on like sort of peasant cultures of which we're like, you never fucking leave. What the fuck are you thinking?
Yeah.
Of course they just go right back. But this is a really interesting movie, I think.
It is, and it's fairly low key. I think both of these movies were kind of surprisingly low key in a lot of ways. The escalation of like the kind of hysterical fervor that the firemen are working themselves into, it never quite goes completely out of control. And
yeah, I mean, like, it's no Death of Stalin as far as insanity is concerned. Like, it's still like all set to like happy polka music.
Yeah,
and like this kind of like it's still quite festive in certain regards. It's still clearly like a somewhat straightforward comedy in some ways.
Yeah, no, it definitely is. I was laughing a lot like throughout a lot of it, and
I never laughed harder than the moment where they are debating about who stole what as a guy's holding the ladder trying to char the edges of the poster.
That was fantastic.
And that is just like, yep, this is the movie in the nutshell.
Yeah. There's not a ton to say about it just because like aesthetically it's pretty straightforward. I mean, there is some great like filmmaking in it. I love that opening where they're all kind of passing the axe around.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Like, some of the tableaus we described are absolutely gorgeous or hilarious at times.
Yeah.
I mean, he does have a great sense of mise-en-scène.
Oh, certainly. He has a great way of, like, just kind of, like, building layers within a shot to kind of maximize each setup. And he kind of moves the camera through the, like, various layers in an interesting way.
Oh, certainly. I guess, like, it's we kind of say, like, communist satire. And in some ways, that's loaded with quite a bit of like socio-political baggage, but it's a surprisingly simple film.
Yeah, certainly.
Like not that much happens, surprisingly.
Yeah, no, it's because the two main plots are the beauty pageant and the raffle things being stolen. Yeah. Like, we're mainly just cutting between those two issues throughout most of the movie until the fire happens. Right.
I think it also must be known that like, and I'm not too sure if this is quite like an Eastern Europe thing, but it also must be known that like in the Soviet class we were taught that like in the Soviet Union there was quite a respect for like age, and like the leaders of the Soviet Union for so many years were jowled and like wrinkled and like these old decrepit figures, which like when you compare like if you can compare Khrushchev to Kennedy, there was just like such a parallel there. Like even if you compare like some of these leaders like the Nixon. It feels like a shocking thing, and we're so used to like beautiful people all over movies, but this is a series of like kind of like lost, like decrepit, like old, very old gentlemen that sort of lead our movie.
Yeah,
and I think that's worth note because like you don't always get to see that. Like we're so used to like movies being full of like 20 to 30-year-olds.
Yeah, certainly, and Also, I think most of the actors in this were non-professional actors.
Yes,
They were just...
that's true. Apparently, there was a thing where like the band couldn't play because they needed to have everything silent so they could actually like get the actors to perform like they normally would.
Right.
So like apparently the band would pretend to play as they would like play out the scene.
Yeah.
Which is great. Which I love that.
Yeah. The band in this movie, I also... He leverages that in some fun ways where they're just riffing, waiting for all the beauty pageant contestants to come up, and they're all just running away.
Yeah. I think this is kind of a movie strange. This is kind of like your mold of like comedy of errors, but also with like a political lens.
Yeah, I do appreciate that genre quite a bit, and
yes, well, as do I.
Yeah. So this is a very fun and somewhat biting, not necessarily like vicious, but a nice little satirical kind of take on communist government. And
I didn't get too much from it because I'm already kind of aware. I kind of studied doublespeak as a sort, but I think like this is a pretty entertaining and pretty poignant take on Soviet style doublespeak.
Yeah.
I give it a resounding thumbs up. Yeah.
No, me too. It's very fun, and you get some thinking out of it too.
Exactly, as the best movies do.
Yeah. So that's The Fireman's Ball. So let's shift gears here to 1965's Loves of a Blonde.
Yeah. I have some... I'm sort of torn on this movie because there's something to be said. Like, there was a lot of clarity in The Fireman's Ball about like these are like old men like looking at kind of predatorily looking at like 16 to 20-year-old women. And there was some of that in this movie, especially like near the beginning, where like there's like the men trying like to like wine and dine these women who look like they're 16. Like they look like this. I think, do they ever say like what the main woman's age is?
I'm not sure that they do.
Yeah, so there's that bit, but there's also like the scene where like she goes home with the piano player, and that all plays like really strange, and you just get the sense that like this woman has never had agency in her own life, nor would she understand how to reckon with it. And I'm sort of wondering how to approach that as insofar as a critical lens is concerned.
Yeah, well, it's weird because I do think the scene between them is kind of sweet in some ways, but like the way that she kind of reacts and the things that she does afterwards kind of suggest a naivete that is maybe kind of changes the context of it a little bit.
Like, I think the power dynamic of that scene is something that like you can readily debate, and also like there was quite a bit of like, shit, what the fuck do I do in that scene? And also like I think and also like there's like that great moment where like he can't like close like he can't close the blind.
Yeah.
And you get like that like one of those like great Miloš Forman tableaus where like he's like rolling it up and with like the windows in the background he's rolling it up, and like the woman's kind of and she's kind of just like looking over, and you get like, oh wait, she probably has never seen a penis before. And so, and that's a fascinating scene, partially because of that. But I'm not too sure how to interact with it and whether it is problematic or not.
Well, it didn't strike me that way when I was watching it, but I mean, upon reflection, it is interesting to think about. Because she seems in control for that bit, at least.
But there's also moments like there's like the scene where like she's in the corner crying, saying "Get away from me, get away with me," where she just really feels like she has no. There's like this woman like really has no control over anything. And like she's just resorted to like literally cowering between dorm beds, and like it also makes me know that like I was watching this movie with my girlfriend, and like we were discussing like the power dynamics of that scene quite a bit, and exactly what that meant, and we were discussing like what is the consent in this scene? Like, is that a moment of consent? What is that? Because there's never like a moment of yes, you can do this. So there's a lot of like debating with that, and I try to analyze that because I think that is like something that is formative about this movie and about this character.
No, certainly. And I think that like the kind of the back half when like she goes to Prague to visit him, just kind of like in response to one of those customary like, oh, come and see me sometime, and she takes it very at face value and just ends up at his parents' house, which is a very entertaining sequence.
Yes.
The way that like he kind of treats her like when she shows up there, and what ends up happening where like they don't know what to do with her, and she's kind of like not totally sure why she's there, and she just kind of ends up leaving. I think that that kind of shifts what we're supposed to be thinking about like with this movie and with this character in some ways. Like it's tough to talk about because like I just kind of wasn't focused on a lot of those issues like when I was watching it for whatever reason.
Yeah, well, I think especially like thinking about like when I think it must be known that like when I'm with my girlfriend, like we talk about these things quite often because like they're both like interesting things to talk about and are kind of essential to building a relationship.
Sure.
So like when these issues come up, we do talk about them, and like that kind of lens kind of stuck with me for the rest of it. And with that, I'm just not quite sure what to make of this movie. Like I'm not quite sure what to make of the ending. I'm not quite sure what to make of her relationships. I'm just utterly perplexed by this movie, and I'm just not entirely sure what really to say about it.
Well, I think that what it's dealing with is kind of like the how relationships are constructed and like the nature of relationships in kind of a repressive society to some degree.
And that kind of hierarchy of them as well, because I think there is like a point to like the I think it's like three like old men kind of being predatory towards them.
Yeah, and I mean like the whole setup of it is that like this factory town that our main character works in is like has a ratio of 16 women for every man.
Yes.
So I think like what kind of gender dynamics emerge when you have something like that.
Yeah, it's sort of. I think the main image of the movie is like the man walking into the women's dormitory, and there's like just so many women surrounding him, and he's like eating, and it is like the cock in the hen house sort of thing.
Right. I mean, I'm kind of struggling to talk about it, but I mean, I think that like the aesthetic pleasures of the movie I found like quite satisfying in a lot of ways.
Yeah, there are quite a few like gorgeous like black and white rendered images. Like I adore the scene where like she's just kind of waiting on the side of the road.
Yeah.
With, like there's the light, there's the electrical poles in the background, and it just seems like the Czech landscape just goes on forever.
Yeah.
And like she's just utterly in the middle of nowhere.
And I love the music in this movie, like that kind of opening song that plays over the credits. I've been kind of humming it since I watched the movie, but yeah, I don't know. I think that this movie is kind of just it's a portrait of a character like in this very particular situation, and is kind of like showing you like how she deals with it and like kind of what her relationships are like. I mean, it's never quite clear like if this is her first relationship. Well, I think she already like has a boyfriend of sorts like when the movie starts, and but he's not really a presence in the movie at all.
Oh no. I'm looking at the Wikipedia page sort of searching for things. I think that like idea of like you brought this up earlier of like sex in a repressed society, because it must be known that like the sexual revolution just didn't really happen in the Eastern Bloc because of like the state that happened that was there. So like the kind of discussions we were having about sex in the 1960s just were not happening.
Yeah.
So like there was just like I think it must be known that like maybe that is like what I am supposed to be reading onto like the subtext of that scene where she goes to the man's apartment and has sex. Maybe that's what I should be reading is like both of these people have no idea what they're doing.
Yeah, I think so. Like, because he, the piano player who she, has sex with, like, is very young himself. Like, and
also naive.
Yeah, and very naive. He still lives with his parents.
Yeah.
I think he is kind of as equally unsure of, like, how to, like, have a relationship with her as she is of how to have a relationship with him.
Yeah, I think it kind of all goes back to that image of him failing, like, to put down the blinds, like, just the utter, just, like, lack of competence there.
It's a portrait of kind of, a young people, trying to be in love and trying to manufacture a relationship. And I think that, like, so much of how the male character acts is dictated on, like, who he's with. Like, obviously he's going to be kind of cagey, like, in front of his parents, and he kind of just is all constantly unsure of what's going on. And so I don't know, it's hard to say, like, kind of what the power dynamics are that we're supposed to intuit from this.
I guess, like, I'm also, like, especially, like, this movie seems to end on a quite nihilistic note.
No, maybe, I don't know, nihilistic. It's a somewhat melancholic note, but I think that, it can seem nihilistic just because of kind of the political and societal layer that's on it.
And just sometimes, like, the visual composition.
Sure. But I also think that, like, look past that veneer, it is a pretty, like, simple story of kind of a first romance and like, just kind of, a relationship that just doesn't really go anywhere. Like, I think this could be, you, like, transpose it to, like, millennials in modern Manhattan, it'd be a very different movie, but I think you could preserve a lot of kind of the narrative through line, and it would play similarly in some ways.
Okay, I think especially there is still, like, the idea of going to the capital is still a thing in, like, the modern day America, because there's, like, I think we've shown more and more that, like, there's, like, a distinct rural urban divide.
Certainly.
So I think you're right about that. I think you're kind of helping me sort of think about this, because it also must be known that I was absurdly bored by the movie. So, like, sometimes it is just difficult to pay attention, but I think I do have a more clear vision of what this movie is trying to say than I did before, because I'm just going, because while watching, I'm like, what the fuck are these parents saying? What the fuck am I supposed to get from this?
Yeah. Well, I think it must be noted that whole bit with the parents is hilarious. At least I thought so. And, like, their whole relationship, I think that honestly it's just kind of meant to be just a point of contrast. Like, you see them, who are obviously well into a mature relationship at this point, and you kind of get the feeling that the love has, the spark is gone a bit, and, like, the mother is very kind of domineering in a lot of ways.
Maybe I should, like, do, like, research onto, like, what the Czech Republic was like at this point, because, like, currently the Czech Republic is one of the most atheistic societies in the world, but, like, it's a traditionally Catholic place, and I'm curious, like, what that looked like under this point in the communist government.
Yeah, no, I think that
what divorce would mean in this society.
Right. And I think that kind of, that whole sequence is a nice encapsulation of kind of the generational divide and the conservative values and the development of all that. And I think that works in some interesting ways. So there may be more layers to this movie than I had kind of given it credit for at first.
Yeah, I certainly have a lot to like go through with it, especially, like, with my, like, rudimentary knowledge of Central Europe. And I think it's an interesting document, especially if you are interested in the Eastern Bloc and, like, what these regimes do to personal relationships, because we are just so used to them as, like, politics as, like, this broad overacting thing that doesn't really affect your personal life, and that is just, like, just completely not true if you study these, like, totalitarian regimes in any detail. So I guess, like, but I was also, like I said earlier, absurdly bored, and, like, I'm just kind of like, it's not quite. I think you're right. It's not quite cinema verite in the same way, but there's something kind of like French New Wavy about, like, it's sort of a depiction of temporal bonds, and, like, how, like, it sometimes it does the sort of Cleo from 5 to 7 thing of, like, let's do things at real time.
It also kind of looks like a lot of kind of the early Truffaut movies in places.
Yeah, that also must be correct. I'm curious, like, what relation Miloš Forman might have had to Francis Truffaut, and what of those films he was actually able to see, even.
Well, I think I read something where he, like, the producer who funded the Firemen's Ball, like, got offended by it or something, and he ended up, like, getting funding for it from Godard and Truffaut.
Interesting.
I think that's true. I don't think I'm making this up. Let me fact check this real quick. Yeah,
oh yeah, you're right.
Carlo Ponti, yeah, he took umbrage at the film and pulled his financing, but producers like Truffaut and Godard picked up the rights. Yeah, so I guess he must have had some kind of relationship there.
Yeah, especially because, like, it is certainly French New Wavy in, like, something in a very distinct way.
Yeah,
but also, like, I don't like the French New Wave, so.
It all goes back to that.
I can't really recommend it as a piece of entertainment.
Yeah,
but I can certainly, like, see what one could get from it, and I do think that, like, this I do think, like, the scene where she goes to the apartment is utterly fascinating.
Yeah. All right, so that is Miloš Forman week. Some interesting documents, if nothing else. I think that these movies are definitely worth your while, if they're not the most entertaining thing in the world.
Yeah. I think Fireman's Ball is pretty fun.
Yeah. I'd still be curious to check out some of his more kind of his later American work. I've seen Amadeus. People
I love Amadeus.
People versus Larry Flint seems interesting, and Man on the Moon is something that I've always, like, kind of hovered around and never actually watched.
Yeah, I'd be very interested in seeing this further.
Yeah.
Though maybe more as American stuff than going back to the Czechoslovak well, but
yeah.
Again, maybe this is kind of my job as a wannabe historian.
Yep. All right, so that wraps it up for this one. Now, next week is going to be fun. We are finally hitting the big 100 here on the Hack Fraud Show. So let me just give you a tease of what's to come next week.
We've been sitting on this bombshell for quite a while.
So we have constructed a rudimentary bracket of some of not necessarily our favorite. Some of them are, some of them aren't, but a smattering of a range of movies from the last year or so of the podcast that we are going to.
We noted that, like, we didn't just want to make it, like, where we knew, like, what films we liked the most.
Mm-hmm.
We tried to make it so, like, okay, this film we'd have an interesting conversation about. That film we hated. Oh, this film we're not quite sure about. Let's put that in.
Yeah.
So I hope it isn't just like the Life and Death of Colonel Blimp is the best movie ever made.
Right. Which there will be a fair share of that, to be clear. Yes. But we're also going to be revisiting. I'm sure we're going to be relitigating some things.
Certainly. The Fountain might be one.
Oh boy. We'll see how that goes. But
I don't think there's going to be as much controversy around it as you think. But
yeah. So we're gonna work our way towards our kind of our collective number one movie of the past year of Volume 2, as Reed likes to say. And I think we might also I think we'll try to do it quickly. I think we should still make, like, personal lists of, like, our top 5 and just, like, quickly run them down.
I think it's something. There'd be sort of something at the end, like what. It might also be known, like, what we actually wanted to win.
Yeah.
Like, if the bracket worked a different way, what we would have chosen.
Yeah.
So I think it's going to be a really interesting, likely 3 hours of podcasting.
I hope not, because I still have to edit these things, but we'll see. So anyway, be on the lookout for that. We'll probably make a decision about what movies we're going to watch next after we do that. But anyway, as always, thank you all for joining us, and we will see you next time.
Is your laptop attempting to seize the means of production?
My cursor is frozen again.
Yeah, well, that's been, like, a joke, like, because my girlfriend's currently in this awful Latin class, so I routinely tell her, just seize the means of production and revolt. Throw off your chains and seek help.